The diner sat in near silence. The only sounds were the faint hum of a ceiling fan and the gentle clink of a coffee cup being placed back onto its saucer somewhere near the counter. Morning sunlight streamed through wide glass windows, spilling golden beams across the black and white-tiled floor. And in the middle of that calm, perfect quiet, a little girl suddenly fell to her knees. Her small hands shook as she clasped them together. Her voice cracked as she cried out, her tears catching the light like tiny drops of crystal. Every biker in the room froze. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd ever expect to see in a place like that. Not in front of men who looked like they could command thunder itself. Yet there she was, a fragile child, pleading for something that made no sense at all. She was begging them to arrest her. If you believe in compassion, in second chances, and in the small moments that remind us the world still has good hearts, take a second right now to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Talks. Because this story isn't just meant to be heard, it's meant to be felt. Her name was Sophie Maynard. She was only 8 years old. The first time she stepped into the Devil's Diner, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was tangled, her shirt torn at the sleeve, and her knees bruised and scraped. Inside, the Devil's Disciples, a local motorcycle brotherhood, were gathered for their usual Sunday breakfast. Among them sat Grayson Hol, the group's leader. Built like a brick wall, his beard streaked with silver, and his arms inked with a lifetime of choices. Grayson was a man people respected, and sometimes feared. When Sophie dropped to her knees before him, the entire diner went still. Forks hovered in the air. Conversations died mid-sentence. Her tiny, trembling voice broke through the silence. Please, please arrest me. I can't go back home. Those words hit every man in that room harder than they'd ever admit. They'd seen fights, blood, loss, even prison, but nothing prepared them for a child asking for punishment instead of help. Grayson's jaw tightened. Slowly, he crouched down until his eyes met hers. Behind him, the other bikers exchanged uncertain glances. Some looked angry, some heartbroken. No one knew what to do. Between broken sobs, Sophie began to tell her story. Her mother had passed away a few months earlier, leaving her in the care of her mother's boyfriend, a man who'd promised to protect her, but turned into her worst nightmare. He blamed her for everything: the bills, his anger, his loneliness. Every night, Sophie hid under the kitchen table, waiting for the sound of the front door closing when he left for the bar. Every morning, she prayed she wouldn't wake up there again. That morning, she'd finally run away. She didn't know where she was going. Her feet simply carried her until she saw a row of leather-clad men outside the diner. They looked strong, fearless, powerful. In her innocent mind, they had to be the law. And if they could arrest her, maybe they could also save her. The bikers stood frozen, unsure what to say. They were used to roaring engines and open roads, not shaking voices and tear-stained faces. Rhett, the youngest of the group, blinked hard, trying to hide the tears threatening to fall. Grayson's heart twisted. Not in pity, but in rage, not at Sophie, but at the cruelty that made her believe she was the problem. He asked quietly where she lived, who had hurt her, how long it had been happening. But she could barely speak. The only words that escaped her were a whisper. Please don't send me back. Grayson rose to his full height, looked at his men, and they didn't need a single word. One nod. That was all. They knew what had to be done. They weren't police, but they were men who understood justice when they saw injustice standing right in front of them. Minutes later, the engines thundered to life. Grayson led the charge down the road toward the shabby little house Sophie had described. Back at the diner, the cook, a kind older woman named Marlene, stayed behind with Sophie, handing her a cup of hot cocoa and softly running her fingers through the child's hair. When the bikers arrived, they didn't storm the place. They didn't shout. They simply stood tall, 10 men in black vests, shoulder to shoulder, as the door opened. The man inside froze when he saw them. Grayson didn't need to raise a fist. His voice was calm, cold, and certain. "You'll never lay a hand on that girl again." Then, instead of violence, he made a call. To the sheriff. By sunset, the man was in handcuffs, and Sophie was finally safe under the care of social services. But that wasn't the end of her story. In the weeks that followed, the devil's disciples began to visit her often. Not out of guilt, but out of love. They brought food, clothes, and one special gift, a little pink bicycle, with Sophie painted in white letters across the frame. Grayson found himself stopping by nearly every day after work. He told himself it was just to make sure she was okay. But deep down, he knew better. She'd awakened something inside him. Something he'd buried long ago. Years earlier, he'd lost his own daughter in a car accident. Her name had been Hazel. She would have been around Sophie's age now. One sunny afternoon, Sophie spotted Grayson waiting near the diner again. She ran to him. No fear this time, just a bright, beaming smile. She told him she was starting school soon. That she had a foster family who cared for her. And that she missed everyone at the diner. Grayson felt his throat tighten as he wrapped his rough, tattooed hand around her small shoulder. "You did nothing wrong, kid," he whispered. "You were brave." That night, the bikers gathered for coffee again. But this time, the talk wasn't about engines or open highways. It was about Sophie. About how she'd changed all of them. They made a promise. To sponsor her schooling. To stand by her through every chapter of her life. They called her their little sister. Months later, during a charity ride through town, the group slowed as they saw a familiar figure by the roadside. Sophie, waving a handmade sign that read, "Thank you for saving me." The wind carried her laughter as the bikes rolled past, and for the first time in years, those hardened men felt tears sting their eyes behind their helmets. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Talks. Because stories like this remind us that kindness doesn't always wear a high-low. Sometimes it rides a Harley. And before we close, tell me in the comments, if you saw Sophie that day, kneeling on the diner floor, would you have stopped? Grayson never called himself a hero. But every Sunday morning, when the bikes pulled into the diner and Sophie's laughter echoed through the air, he'd smile quietly. Because sometimes, the bravest act isn't fighting the world. It's protecting the smallest soul, who believes the world has already given up on her. For the devil's disciples, that was the ride of their lives.